Hi, friends. This is Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Principal Matters podcast. Jen, this week we're going to be interviewing, a wonderful leader from Fairfax, Virginia, Darin Thompson, on an incredible book that he wrote. And before we do, we always answer questions. And this question came from a recent conversation, actually a couple of conversations I've had with leaders. So I put it into one question. I'm wanting to intentionally develop the leaders on my team. What ideas or suggestions do you have? And I know we have 5 minutes, Jen. You and I could probably talk about this for 20. But if you have a leader that really wants to be intentional about developing their own leaders, where would you begin?
I love retreats, even if they're only 2 or 3 hours, to go off-site, have a meal together, and have the team talk about who they are and where they want to go. And that ties I know, you and I had some notes we sent back and forth, and I don't wanna steal your thunder, but you had talked about ask them, what do they want? And I think that's what a retreat can do. And I like retreats because the speed and pace of conversation really does seem to slow down and people can be more thoughtful and, do some sort of activity with them where not only can they say who they are and where they've been as a leader, but where they want to go. And I like the idea of doing that when things are slower and, there's not kids coming being sent down to the office or fire drills to have or evaluations to complete, just retreating.
I agree. And something that I have found really practical, and this is different from place to place, Jen, but most leaders I work with have some kind of formal evaluation process that they're doing with their leaders. If you don't, you should consider, how do you measure the growth of your leaders? But what I have found is a lot of times those formal measurements become another to-do list unless you make it collective. So I know leaders who also, maybe it's in the retreat setting or at the beginning of school, they'll just pull together and they'll say, okay, if we're going to be doing these measurements of ourselves, let's talk about where do we really want to grow? Like, let's really make this real so that when we set these goals together collectively, we're not just measuring something to check off a list, we're measuring something that matters to us. So that's why I think asking, looking for feedback, probing where people want to grow can be really helpful too. Another suggestion, Jen, and I didn't do this a lot as a leader, but I know leaders who do. I do this with a lot of my masterminds, but I know a lot of leaders that will do book studies. They'll just pick a book. We're going to read this together throughout the year. It just gives us a way to stimulate our thinking and to have someone's voice in our heads besides our own. That can be helpful too. I've also had leaders who are intentional about bringing short lessons. And you have to be careful because you don't want to wear people out with your sage from the stage presence. But I'm one of those, I've said this so many times, Jen, you know this about me, but I'm one of those leaders who, when I'm on the other side of a leader, I tend, sorry to be this way, but I tend to be that kid, and the same kid I was in school, like, why are we doing this? Like if someone's going to bring a lesson, I'm like, we have so much to do. Why are you doing this? And then I also tend to be the one that about halfway through what they're trying to teach me, the light bulb comes off and I go, oh my gosh, I actually needed this. And so your leaders may or may not seem open to you, like bringing things to them or highlighting principles or revisiting goals. But I'm going to bet they also appreciate it because they need it too. And I always appreciate leaders that took the time to be intentionally trying to show me something that was important to them that should be important to me too.
I like to do that, but have it be very situation embedded. So anybody I've ever mentored, I would, once a decision had been made, I would say, okay, I want to tell you what my thought process was and why I did it this way. And then I really want you to tell me if you would have done the same thing or if you were sitting there thinking, oh, I wish she'd do something else. And then through that talking and reflecting, then you know how to do something with it next time. The word I made up about that is proactive reflection. I'm going to write a piece about that pretty soon, but just that proflection piece of mentorship.
Oh my gosh, Jen. So yesterday I was doing some PD with, it was a rural district and it was a staff PD. They won't mind if I say Wilson Public Schools invited me down, and this is a very rural district. So you can get all of their staff in the big, meeting room together. And so they were just so passionate and so engaged. But when I got to the end of the time that we had together, before I did my final content, I just stopped. And I wish I had known that word, because I just said, hey, I just want to stop and reflect. You're all teachers, you're all educators, everybody in here, no matter what your title is now. Let's talk about what happened today
Right.
that reflects engaged learning. And it's so cool, because when you have to stop in the moment and they go, oh, we set
Right.
goals. We were collaborative. We paired and shared. We rotated ideas. We accepted each other's feedback with open. That's perflection. I'm stealing that word. Jen, I can't wait for that post. I will add one other thing for leaders that want to be intentional about developing their teams. In this is all situational, Jen, but you and I both work with teams who bring us in to help develop, because sometimes bringing someone in from the outside gives a voice into the room that's different from the room, but might resonate with the values that you really share. And this person's voice is going to bring that value in a way that people are going to listen to it differently. And so whether that's in person, whether that's virtual, sometimes bringing a friend in or another leader in or someone else's experience in can be helpful too. You may want to make a list of like a few experienced leaders that, man, they learn the ropes, that you could have invite to do a drop-in, or invite to just share a few things, or invite to the very end of the meeting, or whatever. So those are just some ideas, Jen. I know Q&As are only 5 minutes, but anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's a great way to start. And I would say, if you're looking to grow leaders, give yourself time. Nobody learned everything in 1 year, 2 years, even 10 years. So just be a good mentor, and don't think that there's ever going to be a finished product.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, if you have other ideas that you'd like to share with us on intentionally building the leadership of your teams, then please let us know. You can reach us at my email address at will@williamdparker.com. And Jen, how can they stay connected with you?
Yep, they can find me on my website, jenschwanke.com.
Well, I know you're going to love this conversation on the Cornerstones of Effective Schools with Dr. Darin Thompson. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Over 1 million teachers use iExcel in their classrooms every day for one reason. They love it. Why? iExcel is where the magic happens. With just one platform, teachers can personalize learning for every student. iExcel gives teachers all the tools they need to enhance and differentiate instruction without adding work to their plates. Plus, iExcel has decades of expertise and is proven to be effective. Studies on more than 70,000 schools across nearly 50 states show that those who use iExcel outperform others on state tests. Ready to bring the magic to your school? Visit iexcel.com/PM to learn more. Support for Principal Matters comes from DigiCoach and its walkthrough tool. When Kathleen Beckham was a district director, she would walk through classrooms and see teachers engaging students in learning or observe elements missing in instruction. Her biggest challenge was finding the time to give those teachers meaningful and helpful feedback they would value as coaching and not correction. In the past, Kathleen spent hours in follow-up email exchanges after informal walkthroughs. That all changed when she discovered DigiCoach. She now had a tool that could help her send immediate feedback from her phone or tablet. DigiCoach is a fully customizable tool created by school leaders for school leaders to not only collect walkthrough data, but also ensure every teacher receives ongoing support, feedback, and coaching. It features thousands of pre-written research-based commendations and coaching tips that can be included along with your own observation comments in a follow-up email, ensuring all teachers receive effective and timely support. Are you ready to make the most of your walkthroughs with a tool that saves you time and enhances meaningful feedback to your teachers? Go to digicoach.com to learn more and tell them that Principal Matters recommended you check them out. That's digicoach.com.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 513. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week, we're going to be talking about the cornerstones of effective schools with my special guest, Dr. Darin Thompson. Darin A. Thompson, PhD, is a veteran K-12 leader from Fairfax, Virginia, with nearly 20 years of experience, and founder of Pivotal Leaders Group, two-time Outstanding Principal of the Year semifinalist within his region. Dr. Thompson has led transformative school improvement efforts across multiple school divisions, resulting in double-digit gains in student outcomes and significant reductions in achievement gaps for historically underserved populations. A regular presenter at conferences with NAESP and NASSP and Making Schools Work, as well as the Virginia Alliance of Black School Educators. Dr. Thompson has contributed to Education Week, the Journal of Urban Learning, Teaching, and Research, and he's the author of the new book, The Four Cornerstones of Effective Schools, published with Solution Tree. He's also a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. Dr. Thompson, if anyone knew how hard it was for you and I to get this recording going, they'd be wondering if either one of us really has a degree. But welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something they may be surprised to know about you?
Oh yeah, awesome. Thank you. Well, after hearing all of that, it takes me back to, thinking about the fact that I being an educator was not my original plan. That was not the trajectory. I originally wanted to be an attorney, then that turned into me wanting to be a financial planner. And after trying my hand at that, wasn't successful. I ended up living off some credit cards with a family to feed. I had to make a quick decision. So I found myself teaching at a local middle school not too far from where I grew up. And, the moment I stepped foot into the classroom, I was like, this is it. I finally found a space where I connected with my purpose and my passion. And fast forward, a principal at a different school where I was working at the time walked up to me and she said, "You know what? You're gonna be a principal one day." And I'm looking at her like, "Not me, not even." And she said, "You're gonna be a principal. As a matter of fact, you have game duty tonight. We have a basketball game, and here's a radio." And that's how it worked out. And I really enjoyed the experience of being given those opportunities and leadership. And fast forward, got my endorsement as a school principal, and it took off from there in terms of me taking that path or going down that road towards school leadership.
Well, Darin, what a great story. And just so Principal Matters listeners have some context, you and I have connected outside of this recording. And thank you for being a listener to the podcast. Thank you for reaching out when you wrote your new book. And
Yeah.
this is exciting for me because I've had an opportunity to look at some advanced parts of your book. And I'm just so excited to bring these cornerstones to Principals Matters listeners because you've experienced education at every level. I mean, from 6 years in the classroom to serving as an AP and then being a principal and then transitioning to supporting leaders through the central office. When you think about school improvement, which is your jam,
Yeah.
what do leaders need to understand most for effective outcomes, no matter what role they're serving in?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first things first, I would share that if, a leader is in a situation where there are challenges with school improvement, we have to have some beliefs that are connected or aligned with growth, agency, and strategic leadership. That's the only way, having beliefs like that, void of limiting beliefs, that is the way to guarantee successful and productive leadership when we talk about school improvement. And then the other thing that leaders need to think about that I want leaders to understand is that the approach that we most often use when it comes to school improvement, it is highly technical in nature. It has an exclusive focus or heavy emphasis on what to implement. What is what I mean by the technical side of it. And with that, we're talking about the strategies and the interventions as part of your school improvement plan. Now, with that being said, we all know that schools are very dynamic, they're complex, and the conditions aren't always ideal. And when we have these environments where there are challenges, the conditions aren't ideal. And so, with that being said, this heavy focus on the technical side creates a gap where there's misalignment between the conditions for improvement and the efforts around your improvement goals. So, closing that gap, addressing that missing link is the pathway towards successful improvement.
Okay, so let's talk about the conditions before the implementation.
Yeah.
And this may be why you start your book with this idea of the kind of a mindset that a leader has to bring in to this work. You call it the pivotal leader mindset. So, what does that look like? How do you step into a situation with all of those dynamics, especially when you're trying to implement school improvement, and first make sure that you have the mindset to understand those dynamics between condition and implementation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So with that being said, I'll define it, um, the pivotal leader mindset from the standpoint of having a mindset that, number one, allows you to lead school improvement productively, but also reshaping, reframing limiting beliefs around the possibility of improvement and aligning those with growth and agency. And that approach, and it's actually a mini framework embedded in the larger framework that I discuss in my book. And the principles associated with that mini framework, they rest with cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's all about reframing by way of identifying limiting beliefs, then challenging those beliefs. If they aren't absolute, and if you can make some adjustments, make some tweaks, and that reality changes, then you can be in a position to now reshape those beliefs. And having that mindset, having beliefs that are growth oriented, again, allow you to lead productively, because I always say this: you bring about what you think about. It's the law of attraction. If you have limiting beliefs, you will have limited results. And so that's the key, or the drive behind the pivotal leader mindset, and why it's so important, because we have to make sure that we're identifying, and we're addressing and reforming, reshaping those limiting beliefs.
Okay, so let me sit there because I'm going to dig into this for a minute and I may go off script because I'm curious. When I think about reframing limiting beliefs, the first challenge I have to address is I may not even be aware of my own limiting beliefs. And until I'm made aware of my limiting beliefs, I can't even begin to address reshaping them.
That's right.
So let's back up, Darin. And I want you to be really specific with listeners. Give some examples of the kinds of limiting beliefs you've confronted in your own leadership, but also within the people that you're trying to lead, and how you were able to reshape and reframe that belief.
Absolutely, precisely. So one of the things that, when we have challenges with school improvement, there's going to be pressure, right? You're going to get pressure from the state. You're going to get pressure from your school division. You're going to get pressure from your supervisor. And also there's going to be criticism from families about low test scores, right? And so with that criticism and pressure, it creates doubt. And so the types of limiting beliefs that will start to surface as the leader, you begin to think that I'm not capable of leading improvement, or improvement isn't possible in my school. Or you start to look outside, and you start thinking that my staff don't care. They don't have the ability. And with those things, right away, we can start to shatter some of those limiting beliefs. When we talk about the fact that my staff just don't have what it takes, then we have to ask ourselves, have we built capacity? Have we focused on providing teachers? Have we provided, focusing on, or excuse me, have we focused on providing our staff with everything that they need to be successful? If we start to think that I'm incapable of leading improvement as the leader, as the principal, we have to ask, well, what evidence do I have? Outside of the fact that it's challenging right now, it's a challenge, and I don't have all the pieces in place for successful improvement. What is the evidence? And if we don't have any concrete evidence, and there are no absolutes, then we can begin to shift and start identifying tweaks and changes in terms of how we approach school improvement, and then reframe those beliefs.
Mm. Okay, what I appreciate about that answer is this is not a actionless optimism. You're stepping into these situations and you're asking, okay, based on the pressures that we're getting in whatever situation I'm trying to improve, whether that's from the state or the school district or the families, when I hear myself thinking, I'm not sure I can do this, or I don't know if my teachers really care enough to do this, The deeper question to ask is, what skills and capacity need to be developed in order for us to do this? And so you refocus your attention back on the actions necessary to lead to the outcomes that you want. And Darin, I just said that in a 1-minute summary, but you and I both know that doing that is a lot harder than what I just said. And
Absolutely.
so the other thing that I appreciate about your book is that you take these pillars, the mindset is first, but then you talk about both constructive school culture and building staff capacity. So when leaders are trying to improve their culture and instruction, what are some practical moves you've seen that make the biggest difference in those areas?
When we look at culture, when we look at focusing on culture, we have to make sure that the culture supports success. And in these environments that we're talking about, we're going to we're going to find out that there are some beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, and norms that completely run counter, right? There are limiting beliefs about student ability. There are flawed approaches in terms of our instructional model. And with that culture piece, and this borrows, and like I said, I think I mentioned this earlier, that the larger framework has these many frameworks embedded within it to strengthen things like leadership mindset, school culture, staff capacity, and collaboration. But going back to that piece about school culture, borrowing upon Anthony Muhammad's work, I leaned heavily in the book and in my practice into leveraging support and accountability the right way in a fashion so that we can in turn address what I call low traction cultures or subcultures. And some of these low traction subcultures surface as complacency, where there's no desire or aspiration around innovation. We have command and control leadership, where a leader may come in and drop the hammer. It's my way or the highway in terms of let's get it done, and that can be quite counterproductive. It actually can in turn incite more resistance. You may have isolation, where you have teachers who are only concerned with the kids on their roster. And that doesn't bode well when we talk about school-wide success. You may have cliques, where you have veteran leaders at the helm and they're influencing some of these novice teachers in terms of undermining the efforts, and not saying that anybody, in my experience, is just brutally malicious in that regard. It's just that this is the way that culture has evolved. It has become the norm in terms of how we do business. And then the other piece, in terms of some of the low traction subcultures, will have flat out resistance. Now this category, you have those individuals who are cynical, apathetic. They look at expectations and priorities as negotiable. And again, going back to that piece about leveraging support and accountability, leveraging those two things in the right way. And when I say the right way, that means we can't come in with accountability first if we haven't supported people. Because it goes back to one thing. When we look at instructional practice, if you want people to deliver high quality instruction, you can't expect people to do what you haven't prepared them to do. So support is a big piece on the front end. And then on that back end, if we have continued um, instances of disengagement or misalignment, we have to start looking at, maybe we have to performance manage this situation, which is where the accountability piece comes in.
Okay.
So that's the
So,
cultural piece.
okay. So let's pause there before we get to the collaboration piece. And if we know that, and I'm just repeating your words, Dr. Thompson, if we know that support must precede accountability, let's get nitty gritty. Let's imagine that you're talking to a leader who may be stepping into a new situation where they're facing some of those risks that you described: complacency, a former leadership of high control, people that are either isolated or in cliques, or just flat out resistance or attempts to sabotage any kind of
Yeah.
change. What would be some of the very first things that you would try to do to create a culture of support before you start leveraging accountability?
Absolutely. So the very first thing you got to do coming in, you have to diagnose the cultural landscape. You got to assess the culture. You got to really understand what you're dealing with. Do we really have these? Um, do we have a constructive culture and we're missing some things, or do we have truly these low traction subcultures that exist? Right. So that's the first thing. And then when we talk about support, on the support end, it's all about understanding, trust, and readiness. And with the understanding piece, I pointed this out a little bit earlier when I talked about you can't expect people to do what you haven't prepared them to do. People have to have a full understanding of the instructional focus, of the vision for success and improvement. If they don't understand those things and you have not communicated those things to them, people don't know that people don't have meaning and direction around the improvement efforts.
Mm.
The other piece, when we look at trust, they have to trust that as a leader, you are committed to the efforts as well. It can't be the flavor of the month where you hear about something that worked well at another location or another school, which is actually disconnected from the realities in your school, trying that, moving on the next month to something else. And then, staff become uh, a little sarcastic about that. And it's like, hey, here we go again. It'll be something different next month. If we don't
Mhm.
build trust within staff, and what I'm talking about trust in that regard is that they trust that we are committed to, whatever efforts or, what revolves around school improvement. And then when we talk about readiness, that's about providing people with what they need to build their knowledge, skills, and confidence to execute on the efforts.
So I just heard you say several things: diagnose and assess before you apply solutions. But then when you step in, you've got that three-prong approach, which is if I don't understand the instructional focus and the vision, I'm a teacher not understanding that from you, I can't execute something I don't understand. If I don't see you're committed to the process that you're inviting us to join, I'm not going to trust you to go down that path with you either. And then if I'm not given the knowledge and the skills necessary to be ready, then I can't actually make change too. Um, Darin, sorry, you know me, I'm an analogy guy, but I feel like I've stepped into the room with a Jedi master on school improvement, and you're slowing down all the moves, and I'm getting to see like slow motion what it looks like. So, and I'm not saying that just to butter you up. You've done this work, and this is why you've written the book. So let's go to that part two, which is building staff capacity for high quality instruction.
Yep.
What are some things leaders should keep in mind, whether they're in a school that they're trying to completely turn around, or maybe they're in an established place? This piece still matters. So talk about how do you build staff capacity?
Okay, so building staff capacity, and I'll reference another mini framework. And within the book, when we talk about building staff capacity, there's what I call the PIN protocol. And that PIN protocol, what that does is it focuses on helping leaders, number one, establish that clear and strong instructional focus and vision. And then the other piece is going back to what I touched on a little bit when we talk about transforming school culture is the level of support that builds capacity, right? So we have to in turn make sure that, our staff again have the capacity, they have the knowledge, the skills and confidence to perform the work. And with that, the key, what you want to accomplish with that, what you want to push towards is instructional effectiveness throughout your building. That means that every single teacher in your building is able to effectively deliver high quality instruction. With that, you have a situation where student success does not depend on what teacher they get. Instruction does not vary from classroom to classroom when we look at it from that lens. And what I've discovered is that teachers, I haven't met a teacher that doesn't want to be a great teacher. They want to be experts in their craft. And it's a matter of, have we prepared them to be experts? Have we prepared them to take them to the next level? And diving deeper into how we build knowledge, skills, and confidence, two things that I'll point out right away. The first thing is professional development. Professional development can't be disconnected and random. And it can't feel like something, it's something that's being done to teachers. They have to feel like it's connected to the realities in the school, and they have to, see it being something that is doable and it can work in their own classrooms. And that's why I'm a huge proponent of teacher-led teacher-led ed camps is what I call them. And when the ed camp piece is that what I used to do as a school leader is that we wouldn't just have one professional development session, during our staff meeting or a staff development day. We would have a menu of options that teachers could choose from, pointing back to what's connected to the realities of our school based upon observational data. And then staff, we would survey staff to see what they needed or wanted by way of professional development. And then the teacher-led piece was that those teachers through observation that we identified as, really knocking it out the park, we would approach them and have some conversation about or inviting them to present, best practice or present what's working in their classrooms. And when staff see that, they feel like they're a part of it and they're willing to invest, they're willing to buy in, and you'll see those practices translate into the classroom for those other teachers that need more support. Now, the other piece when we talk about building capacity is ongoing growth producing feedback. And with that, feedback can't be one of those things that feedback is just reserved for when a teacher is on evaluation. They get a one and done, check the box and move on. It has to be ongoing. So as an instructional leader, effectively monitoring and supporting high quality instruction, it has to be part of your week to week routine and the week to week routine for your admin team. So with that being said, growth producing, it has to connect to your instructional focus, your instructional priorities. So you should have look fors that tie to that. So you're giving feedback to teachers through that lens, through those look fors that are connected to your priorities. And as an admin team, you have to also make sure that you're norming how you're giving that feedback so that there's consistency in terms of what's knocking it out of the park. I hate to use that word. What's knocking it out of the park when it comes to this specific look for, or doing small group. If we use small group instruction as an example, what are the exemplars in that regard? And we're all communicating the same message and feedback around how to get there if we don't have a teacher there delivering high quality instruction, or a teacher who's able to efficiently or effectively utilize small groups.
Wow. Okay. So, Principal Matters listeners, if you are already chewing on because you're probably going to be listening to this in the summer, even though we're recording this months before that, Darin. So, anyone who's listening right now, you're probably thinking about the next series of professional development that you're responsible for leading. And if that's the case, I want you to just rewind about 3 minutes and go back and listen to what Darin said about teacher-led ad camps, where the menus of options are built on the evidence of what's needed within the school, and surveys and feedback from your staff on where they want help, identifying your strongest teachers who can then be facilitating those opportunities for learning to be happening even within your own staff. It doesn't always take an outside person to come in to facilitate that. And then thing two, and I appreciated this so much, Darin, is ongoing feedback from especially your admins, your instructional coaches, people who can observe and provide look for feedback, who can provide norms on how we give that feedback so that we're modeling it, we're teaching it, we're looking for it, and then we're providing feedback when it's happening. I know to just say all of those things out loud might sound simple, but it's not simple, because it requires commitment and it requires structure and it requires somebody to be able to schedule those things too. So I want to ask a follow-up question, Darin, because I want to put a little bit of story with this really important practice. Take us back to some of the experience that you've had trying to implement this, where it's been a challenge for you, maybe where it's sometimes pushed back hard on you, but then where you've been able to see it turn a corner.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll go back to my first principalship, and I remember, just jumping out there with the framework that I developed as a first year principal. I knew it needed to be done. I just didn't know the results were going to end up the way that they ended up. But with that being said, I walked into a situation where both school culture and the instructional model needed some work. I mean, needed work big time. There were some approaches from a system standpoint that just didn't put the school in a position to demonstrate progress that was steady, sustainable, and real. So for me, it was having to establish that, or let me say it like this: it required that I establish meaning and direction, and I was very clear about the meaning and direction. Everything that I did in terms of focus, priorities, everything that I did by way of how we leverage funding and additional resources, I demonstrated to staff that those things were committed, or I was committing those things to that focus. So in turn, staff, started seeing that this is what we're doing. This is where we're headed in terms of improvement. This is where we're headed in terms of our school and our vision. And there was slow buy-in along the way. I'm not going to say that there weren't situations or scenarios where I had to step out of the support and lean into the accountability. And, for me, having to do that wasn't about dropping a hammer or coming in swinging. It was about what we needed in terms of every student being successful in our building. And the people around me, they respected that. As a new principal coming in, the staff respected me. The large majority respected me for doing that, respected our admin team for being committed in that regard. And so there was alignment and engagement that built while, there were those small pockets that we had to address, like I just mentioned. You're always going to have that. You're always going to have a small percentage of people who just don't believe, who just won't buy in, who will push back. And there is obviously the performance management aspect of that to address those individuals. So that was really from a big picture standpoint of how um, I identified the issue with school culture and address school culture, but then the instructional model. Um, there were we said we were operating. This gets into the collaboration piece. We said that we had quote unquote PLCs. And in turn, we weren't operating as a PLC as a school. We were actually just meeting. We had teams of teachers meeting, and those were conversations and coordination versus collaboration. And when I say conversation and coordination, there were discussions about, field planning for a field trip. There were discussions about class coverage because, one of the teachers would be out next week. There were conversations. The teams would touch on student progress, but it was largely focused on those types of things, along with, unfortunately, we had situations where, it was the opportunity to air grievances, which runs counter to success when we start using team collaboration time for that. So for me, I was early on, I had I was fortunate enough to be exposed to the work of the late Rick DeFore. And so for me, I knew that if we were going to make progress and do the things that we ended up doing, we had to adhere to PLC culture, where teams were collaboratively focused on learning and the results, and also engaging around instructional design, delivery, assessment, and then the action research piece, which is identifying those gaps in performance, gaps in practice, and then deploying interventions to close those gaps. And the first year, we weren't a model PLC school. That just didn't happen. But people started to understand the process, and people were leaning into, as a team, our goal here is to identify what students need to know and learn. How do we know that they've mastered it, and how do we respond if they do, and how do we respond if they don't? If the kids master it, if they don't master it. And so with that, those shifts, people will be surprised at how much those two shifts can impact school improvement. When you borrow just upon those two aspects of the model, borrowing upon the framework that I talk about when it comes to school culture, borrowing upon the framework that I talk about when we talk about school collaboration, um, those two things allowed me, again, just to highlight the data. We were able to experience some double-digit gains. One area in particular that really needed a push, and that definitely put us in position where we moved our school out of state monitoring status to fully accredited.
Wow. Okay, Darin. So you've talked a lot about the cultural foundation that has to be set for someone who's stepping in to establish meaning and direction, to make sure that the funding and resources available are being committed to that vision, and then doing it, supporting the people that are doing it, holding people accountable if they're not. But then in addition to that, you talked about that collaboration piece a lot, which is we can't just say that we collaborate and we just get together and gripe or discuss
Yeah.
or look at calendars alone. We have to actually be looking at the focus of student progress and how do we know that students are learning? How do we know when they've mastered learning? And how do we respond when they're not or they are? Because those are the cycles of learning that take place. Um, and you practice what you preach. You've seen gains, you've seen improvement. There's someone listening right now, though, that's just like, Dr. Thompson, all of this is true and helpful, but I can't even seem to get through my day without something crazy, some crisis, some really. So I want you to speak to that leader for a moment, because my bet is that you still had to deal with all those things while trying to implement these focused areas, Darin. So what's been helpful for you as a leader to maintain that kind of focus and momentum while also putting out those inevitable fires?
Yeah, absolutely. The framework is actually what helped, because the framework provided systems. It positioned me and my admin team um, such that we weren't managing people as much as we were managing our systems.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're managing systems, that takes care of a lot when we talk about the lift with respect to, responding and reacting to all of these things that come up. It makes those things much more manageable when you have systems that help run and facilitate effectiveness when we look at what's going on in your school culture, what's going on in those collaborative team meetings, what's going on in the classrooms in terms of delivery of instruction. So yeah, going back, thinking about it from that perspective, the systems allowed me as a leader and allowed others that I've worked with as leaders to navigate those complexities a little bit differently, and not be in a position to overwork, overextend, and over sacrifice to get the results.
Mhm. Okay, that was a very quick answer to something that's a very deep practice challenge for most leaders, and so let me do the will thing and, say what I think I just heard you say, which is, you can have the right beliefs, you can be focused on the kind of culture and outcomes that you want, but it's the systems that you create towards those outcomes that give you the guardrails, so that when things get crazy, when situations have to be managed, you step in and you manage them within the guardrails of the system that you've created. And so if all you do is spend your time managing behavioral norms outside of the construct of the framework, then it's kind of, I'm such a broken record for listeners, and so I apologize, but I just have to say what I've seen happen in practice, Darin, and what I hear you saying too. But the research shows that when leaders and teachers provide high expectations on the one hand, high support on the other, they see better outcomes.
Yep.
If one of those is missing, then if I'm just a high expectations person without the support, then you're just thinking I'm a hardhead and not easy to work with. But if I'm just providing the supports without the expectations, then you're going to eventually see me as a pushover, because all I'm doing is ever responding to everybody's behavior. And so you have to have both of those things to be present at the same time, so that when you're managing really difficult situations, I call it the switch your focus. You're able to switch your focus back to, why are we here? It's almost like I've been watching a lot of basketball this time of the year. So you know how it is when coaches are in the middle of a really hard game, and and teams are really competitive. Maybe they're back and forth, sharing who's leading. And you can tell when you watch a coach, their ability to switch their focus, like to not let the emotion of the moment keep them from focusing on that next play that's going to take them to that next score. Um, so I know we need to wrap up soon, but I want to just stay here, because now you're in a role where you're supporting leaders doing so much of the work that you did for years. And so even as you're supporting leaders, this is such a hard question. What are some things you would say back to the old Dr. Thompson, now that you're in that role, that maybe you wish you had thought about when you were in that practicing role?
Yeah, I wish I would have had the discovery or that epiphany a lot earlier in my career, because I share with people that, I was at a point early on, being a part of the school improvement team as a teacher leader, where I contemplated walking away from education altogether, because it was so difficult in terms of being able to achieve the success or make progress the way we wanted to. And with that being said, you know, not having the knowledge or access to the information that, hey, if we just put these systems in place, if we have the conditions that complement the efforts, we're going to be okay if we just manage that system and stay true to the system. And had I known that a lot earlier, it would have saved me 8 years of frustration, because it was an 8-year journey to discover how to do this work.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because for anyone listening, the moment that you're in is the moment you're in. You cannot wave a magic wand and suddenly have the wisdom of 8 years of experience beyond the experience that you currently have. And I know that we have listeners, Darin, who are both brand new stepping into this work. We also have veteran leaders who listen to this podcast too, that keep finding inspiration for that long-term investment. And so as we're wrapping up, I want you to be able to tell listeners, how can they stay connected with your resources? But I also want you just to speak to those leaders as we're wrapping up. What's some advice that you would have them to hold on to that's important for them to remember in this work that they're doing every day?
First thing I'll tell them is that successful improvement is possible. It's doable, right? We just got to align the conditions for improvement with the efforts around your improvement goals, and the way that we do that is focusing on strengthening beliefs, relationships, skills, and accountability. And, the framework that I reference in my book is a surefire way of addressing those things. And then the other thing is this: I would share with leaders that aside from the fact that improvement is possible, it's doable, it's something that you can accomplish, I would say that it can be done without sacrificing your peace. You can lead with impact without relying on heroics, because in my experience, heroics only lead to burnout instead of progress. So this thing that we call school improvement can be done despite where we see, math, reading, and science scores trending when we look at PISA, when we look at NAEP, when we look at, state to state data. It is possible. We just have to adjust our approach, and you can do it without sacrificing your peace.
So much wisdom. How can leaders find your new book, and how can they stay connected with you?
Yeah, the book is available for pre-order right now. It'll be available fully May 1st, but it's available for pre-order right now at solutiontree.com/for Cornerstones. It's also available on Amazon. And for anyone who wants to stay connected to me, you can connect with me on my website at drdarinthompson.com, and it's DR, Darin Thompson versus DOCTOR. And that's my handle as well on Instagram and YouTube at Dr. Darin Thompson. I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Dr. Darin Thompson. So you can find me on those platforms. And again, you can find the book you can purchase or pre-order the book through Solution Tree or on Amazon.
Well, the book is The 4 Cornerstones of Effective Schools. And this is not just a book that's deep in research. It's also a book that's deep in practice. And so, Dr. Darin Thompson, thank you so much for the opportunity to have your voice in the room with leaders. Thank you for your experience. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for reminding leaders that impact can happen without sacrificing their peace. And Principal Matters listeners, I also just want to encourage you, if you're in a place where you're like, man, I need someone who's walked this road of school transformation, school turnaround, school improvement, who can come in and really rally my staff or really help my leaders, reach out to Dr. Darin Thompson. I'll put all of his links in the show notes. As a fellow Solution Tree author, Darin, congratulations on this new book. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for the time you took to listen and learn today. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.